Hello, I'm Tom, and today I'm going to talk about some books that have nothing to do with the Divine Comedy, which is an extraordinary event for this channel, so please stick around. I'm going to present 6 books that I've read in the last few months that are all about Johann Sebastian Bach. In one way or the other, have to do with Johann Sebastian Bach. I've noticed that yes, there are many books about Bach in general that have been written, but in terms of the popular books, not academic really, there are not maybe as many as I was expecting. There are many more books about Mozart, and in my experience and from my research, even more books about Beethoven, even if many musicians across history and today would agree that the greatest composer of music in the Western world ever is Johann Sebastian Bach. So let's start with a good biography of Bach. I've read the Italian version of this one, but the title in English is the original title of this book, La musica nel castello del cielo, is Music in the Castle of Heaven by John Eliot Gardiner. John Eliot Gardiner is also a musician himself. He's an orchestra director and is actually very famous not only as an interpreter of Baroque music, but specifically of the Bach music. And so he really is an expert on Bach, the composer historically, and very much an expert on his music. I would say this is a great book. It's a really, really great, fantastic book. It's very detailed because it's 600 pages. It really manages to squeeze out from the history that we still have about Bach's life a lot, probably even the most that it can, because even today we don't have so many documents about Bach and his life. After all, we know that Bach lived mostly in the beginning of the 18th century, and he was a Lutheran, pious musician and composer who, for most of his life, he was a family man. He had so many children. I believe overall he had close to 19 children. Not all of them survived, as it happened in his days, but he was very much a father for a lot of his time, a composer, and a very pious Lutheran who spent time studying his Bible in depth. In fact, we still have some annotations done by hand by Bach on the margin of his Bibles. And so, apart from doing that, composing music, directing choirs, teaching music, and being a father, there's not a lot more that Bach did in his life. Therefore, as a biography, there's not really much more to squeeze out. In fact, we don't have a lot of letters written by him. And so it's difficult to really pinpoint and get a deep, authentic, let's say genuine understanding of the person. Obviously, it's very easy to get that by enjoying, listening, and studying his music. So from the little that we know, that's, let's say, demonstrable about Bach's life, we know that he must have been a kind, for sure, but also forceful man, and very disciplined and structured. Obviously, he was German, and in his approach to studying, in his approach to music, and in his approach to life. However, he, at a certain point, towards the end of his life, when people were singing somebody was singing his praises as a musician, somebody was calling him a genius for his music. His reply was, and this has been documented, his reply was, all I did was to work very hard in a very disciplined way. So anybody in the world who does the same since a very tender age can achieve the same results that I have achieved. Now, on one hand, this is the answer of somebody who's very pragmatic, and he probably was, and also humble. But on the other, knowing today the size and the scope of his genius, having listened to his music, It's probably the mother of all understatements to think of Bach as simply somebody who worked hard, because I can work very hard on my music for my entire life, for the next 500 years, and I will never get even near the perfection and the beauty that he achieved in his music. In any case, this is a fantastic book for anybody who's interested in Bach. It doesn't only talk about his life and what we know about it, but Gardiner being a musician, he also delves and dives deeper into some of his most famous and most popular music works, including the St. Matthew Passion, that is considered to be his masterwork. It's a 2.5 hours mass, which is incredible, but at the same time it's not for musicians only. The way in which Gardiner writes is a very accessible way, very popular. So this is, from me, a strong recommend. Now we come to another biography, and this one I did not like. The author is Christoph Wolff, and the title is Johann Sebastian Bach, the Learned Musician. Now, Christoph Wolff is considered, even in academia and in anywhere where I've read praises for this book, he's considered to be the top expert on Bach in the world, in the galaxy, in the universe. There's nobody who knows more about the life of Johann Sebastian Bach than Christoph Wolff. This is probably one of the reasons why I did not like the book, because the level of granularity, the level of boring detail to which this book goes, and it's about 600 pages as well, just like the Gardiner. But Gardiner is more readable, despite being sometimes heavy with details as well. In this one, the problem is that the information, the details, the data is poured down almost like fresh concrete on the book, without any, not even passion, but life. There's no life. It's just fact after fact after fact, almost like Ivan Drago punching Rocky Balboa in the face with facts, facts, facts. And the reader is just under this barrage of punches. I actually got to the end of this book and I felt like I was destroyed. I was physically destroyed and mentally destroyed. It's too much. It's far too much, especially if you are a normal fan of Bach and his music, and especially if you are not. I mean, I would recommend this book very much if you are the Google algorithm, or if you are a particular deep researcher in academia about Bach, because some of the sentences that I found here sound like this. When Bach arrived in Leipzig for his examination and audition, he brought along with him the finished cantata scores and most of the performing parts. On February 8th, the Monday after the cantorate trial, he was reimbursed 20 thalers for his expenses, the same amount allowed Telemann, though Bach had a much shorter distance to travel, suggesting that he stayed in Leipzig for more than a week. Telemann spent exactly 2 weeks there when he auditioned the previous year. We're just missing the shoe size of Telemann and Bach and the number of pieces of hair they had on their head. So yeah, Christoph Wolff is too much, for me at least. It's too dry. There's no life in the book. Not even, let's say, a sense of a sense of the beauty of the music, because the focus on the book is so much on getting each detail right that sounds like it's been written only and purely for university, to compete with other people who might want to compete with Christoph Wolff on who gets the most details right about Bach's life. And that is a competition that, to me, as a normal reader, doesn't matter at all. So I don't recommend this book at all. The third title is this one, a very different type of book, titled The Cello Suites, J.S. Bach, Pablo Casals, and the Search for a Baroque Masterpiece. This is a fascinating, extraordinary book written by Eric Siblin, who is Canadian. He is an award-winning journalist and filmmaker. And the Cello Suites is actually his first book. The reason why I like this book so much is that, first of all, it's not a fictional book. It's simply a description of the author's falling in love with the cello suites, the famous cello suites of Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach's cello suites are 6 solo works by cello, for the cello. And so they are singular musical lines because there's no other instruments involved. And there are 6, they've been written as 6 suites. Within each one of them, there are a number of movements: the saraband, the jig, the minuet, the prelude, etc., etc. The author in this book goes very much in detail of what each of these movements meant in the times of Bach. And so, as always, Bach is creating extraordinarily beautiful music, but always sticking to a certain rigid structure and framework, which was his very specific style. Eric Siblin says at the beginning of the book, "My own discovery of the cello suites had taken place one autumn evening in 2000, which was a Bach year marking 2.5 centuries since the death of the composer. I was in the audience at the Toronto Royal Conservatory of Music to hear a cellist I'd never heard of play music I knew nothing about. From my seat in the Royal Conservatory Concert Hall, the lone figure producing this massive sound with such modest resources seemed to defy the musical odds. Only one instrument and one anchored a very low register. The cello appeared unequal to the task, as if some supreme composer had devised an overambitious score, an ideal text, with little regard for the crude vehicle that was to carry it out." The beauty of the cello is that the sound of it is so similar to the human voice in both the deep tones and the high tones as well. And as part of the subtitle of this book, Pablo Casals is mentioned, which is considered by many to be the best cello player who lived in the 20th century. He was a Catalan cello player, and he's also very important to this story because he's the one who, at the very beginning of the 20th century, rediscovered the cello suites by Bach by a random occasion where he found a copy, a manuscript of the score, the music scores of the cello suites in a store in Spain. And he spent a lot of time studying them because they're not easy to play with a cello. And then only later on, I think in the 1940s or late 30s, he actually recorded them officially for the BBC in London. And his recording is one of the most famous, but then so many people and so many cellists have recorded the suites. One of the most famous ones is Yo-Yo Ma, and in my opinion also his version of the suites is one of the best. I'd like to show you what I'm talking about. So if you're listening now in a sped up way, one and a half or twice the normal speed, please go back to normal speed because otherwise the music gets completely distorted by the video. And I'm gonna play just a little piece from the Cello Suite number 1, the Prelude, which is the most famous of all pieces of the suites. That is absolutely gorgeous, beautiful music. And you can hear that they're very skeletal, these suites, because it's only one melodic line. It's really simply just one musical line that transports you up, down, etc., etc. Anyway, one of the blurbs to this book says, "This is one of the most extraordinary, clever, beautiful, and impeccably researched books I have read in years." And I would agree with that. So, strong recommend for the Cello Suites by Eric Siblin. The fourth book is titled The Great Passion by James Runcie. I hope I'm pronouncing that last name right. James Runcie is British. He's an award-winning filmmaker and the author of 11 novels. He wrote the Sidney Chambers mysteries that have been turned into a TV series called Grantchester. I don't know it, but I've read that it's an interesting series. He's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and lives in London and Edinburgh. It's a historic fiction novel that is about 265 pages long, and it talks about Bach a little bit on as a secondary character, even if the musical power of Bach is really at the center of the novel. In 1727, Stefan Silbermann is a grief-stricken 13-year-old struggling with the death of his mother. Despite his father's insistence that he try not to think of his mother too much, Stefan is haunted by her absence. But when in Leipzig, the school's cantor Johann Sebastian Bach takes notice of his new pupil's beautiful singing voice, Stefan's life is permanently changed. The story describes, of course, the fictional stay of this boy Stefan at the Bach household. And so what I love the most about the book is the passages where we get a glimpse inside Bach's house, inside his family life, how it smelled, how it looked. Everything was crammed because there were so many kids running around, and everybody was singing, everybody was playing some instrument. Music was absolutely everywhere, every single minute of the day. You can see how busy Bach was, but also how busy his entire family, including his wife, were constantly. And I think the author is excellent at reproducing this sense of busyness and how central music was in the life of this family. Of course, we get some glimpses of Bach's personality, and without pushing it too much, I think the author did a great job in this as well, in portraying Bach as a little bit of a rough character, a rough personality, who was really brisk and quick in the way he worked, but also that he had a person who had a great heart and who was deeply in love with God. He was a Lutheran and a very convinced one. At the end of each of his musical works, he used to write only for the glory of God as his philosophy. He was convinced that all the music that he was writing and that he was playing was really for the glory of God. So, as a work of fiction that presents Bach as a historic figure, but also as a human being in 360 degrees, I strongly recommend this book, The Great Passion. The next one is another book that I do not recommend, and that is kind of sitting in between the academic world and the popular world, but I believe it's much more academic than what it's presented like by its editor. The title is Bach Against Modernity by Michael Marison. Who's Michael Marison? He is a Professor Emeritus of Music at Swarthmore College, where he taught until 2014. And he also has been a visiting professor at Princeton and the University of Pennsylvania. This is a fairly short book. It has 172 pages. What I kind of, let's say, walked away from the book with, I'm sorry to say, is not a lot, because it seems like there's a diatribe in the world of Bach specialists and people in the academia world who write about Bach that nobody knows about outside of the university world. This diatribe is, there are many, apparently, who say that Bach was such a modern figure. He was ahead of his times. They love his music so much that they like to think about him as somebody who broke away from the confines of his historical times, the Lutheran Saxony of his times. And the author, Michael Marison, is saying, no, that's not true. Bach was actually very much steeped into his historic times. He was a Lutheran. He was not ahead of his times in terms of his personality and what he did, which is almost like a real obvious fact for anybody who has not been listening to this diatribe. We all know that he was a German pious Lutheran from those times. And so that's why I'm not walking away with anything interesting for myself as a normal listener and a passionate fan of Bach's music. For example, the author says, it's surprising, or at least it ought to be, that today there are so many intelligent and decent people, like my Leipzig friend, who cling to modern views of Bach and his output that are patently contradicted by all available evidence, both repertorial and biographical. Okay, so what's the point of this essay? What's the point of these essays? Is it about you and your friend? Couldn't you just resolve it with a phone call? I'm sorry to sound harsh, but this is not a book that has such a great value, in my opinion. Later on, the author says, my suspicion is that many of us long for a great musical figure like Bach to have been a great thinker who conveys immortal thoughts on the human condition that are personal, modern, and individual to him. But as far as I can tell from the historical evidence, Bach's world and life views were suprapersonal, pre-modern, and not individual to him. Can you see how obvious all this is? And also, can you see how he's really talking about a certain kind of people? People who would long for Bach to be a modern reader of the New Yorker, basically? Who wants that? I'm sure there are people like that, but who cares about them? A couple of shorter essays follow this initial essay about Bach and modernity. But again, if you're not a completist, let's say, this is not a book that I would suggest. And finally, we get to a book that is probably more popular and famous than the ones that I've talked about so far, which is Gödel, Escher, and Bach. This book actually was published years ago. Let's see exactly when. It was copyright 1979. And so it's an older book that I'm sure many of you have heard about at least. And Bach is quoted marginally in this book. So this is not really a book about Bach, I have to admit. It's like the author Douglas Hofstadter. I've read another book by him that's called I Am a Strange Loop, about the nature of consciousness. And his style is very similar in both books. It's a style that I don't know how to define exactly, but it kind of somersaults from one topic to another, always circling maybe one main topic, but being able to make whatever it is talking about very interesting and appealing, with examples, anecdotes, and even mathematical tests, because there's a lot of math in this book as well. The reason why Bach comes out in this book is that it's a book about correlations, mathematical correlations between many different elements. I know it's a very vague description, but that's really what the book is about. And so on this page, for example, Bach comes out as follows. Bach, too, occasionally wrote acrostics, which isn't surprising. After all, counterpoint, which was the style used by Bach, and acrostics, with their levels of hidden meaning, have quite a bit in common. Most acrostics, however, have only one hidden level. or one could make a contracrostic where the initial letters taken in reverse order form a message. And I would conclude this explanation of how Bach relates to this particular book by reading this other paragraph that says as follows. Do you really understand Bach because you have taken him apart? Or did you understand it the time you felt the exhilaration in every nerve in your body? Do we understand how the speed of light is constant in every inertial reference frame? We can do the math, but no one in the world has a truly relativistic intuition. Each of us can understand people, and that is probably about as close as you can come to understanding intelligence and consciousness in an intuitive way. And finally, being an intermediate pianist myself, or amateur, I should say, I'm gonna play a prelude by Bach at the piano, the famous prelude in C major, and then another piece by him that is maybe a little less popular or less famous. And I really hope you enjoy it. Bye.